little spectrum.
A cloud is like the self, it's an illusion of a unified entity, but in reality, it's just a whole bunch of stuff doing its best, just kind of going wherever the wind takes it, and every once in a while explodes into a torrential down.
It just kills it.
Butterscotch.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 374 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast, Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, and I'm the web programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artist.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's July 29th, 2020. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be swears and curses and profanity in this show. So if you don't like that, well,
maybe some hexes.
Yeah.
Lots of hexes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're kind of moving over to hexes from curses because we feel like curses are just too easily dispellable, and there's too many classes in the game now that can get rid of them.
Yeah, hexes they're like a more portable spell format. Also, you can sort of put them on a lot of different platforms. Understand hexes a little better than curses. Curses kind of like old. Sort of old
school. And you don't need as many reagents to perform them.
Yep.
They're quicker, quick and dirty. You can just bust out 3 or 4 hexes, no problem. But a single curse might take you all afternoon because you got to draw the shapes on the ground. You got to light the candles. You got to get dolls and stab them. I mean, the whole thing is just it's a real undertaking.
But what's interesting? There's that we talk about the Jevons paradox a lot, right? And people wanted to make curses a little more efficient, which were the kind of the hex, came
because you didn't want to spend all day casting curses.
Yeah, everyone's I could get like 3 more curses in today if they were just half as took half as long to do. And now it's true, but everyone's just actually the demand has just gone up because curses are just hexes now basically become so much more available that everybody and their dog wants to hex.
But it also reveals the nuance of the Jevons paradox, right? Because now there's a more diversity of spells that you're basically casting on people. Because with the hexes, sure, you're making more now because the demand's gone up, right? But now you're making 10 different hexes for one curse, right? So the one curse does one thing. All of your, your entire ancestral line is ghosts now or something, right?
Yep.
But just one thing.
Easy. That's an easy one.
That's cool. Yeah. That's like a cool thing, right? Very, very powerful, very effective, very scary, right? But you get the hexes though. Now it's everywhere you step is sticky, right?
Or your mustache hair now pokes into the inside of your nose and tickles you all day.
And no matter what you do, it's going to pop right back. Cut it, grows back, right? Doesn't matter what you do.
It's going to poke you right in the inside of your nose again.
Hit somebody with 10 things like that, right? Same amount of effort as one curse. And now that person, sure, ghost, spooky, right? But having every moment be just frustrating.
Just kind of irritating.
Oh, yeah, it's miserable. It's way more effective. So, we're trying to move into, just a better use of our time. So we're kind of moving into the hex model. Yeah. So
get more hex for your buck.
Also, we'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for letting us grab your money. We'll think about, not hexing you, I guess.
It's the best way
we'll think about it. I mean, we're still going to do it, but we'll think about it.
You gave me pause.
Also, we've gotten a lot of questions about whether we are okay because some of we are in St. Louis and oh boy, it flooded. Adam and I are in St. Louis and we got, I believe, in some of the sort of townships. Because St. Louis is, it's kind of sprawling,
There's hills, rolling hills, it covers the gamut in terms of how vertical you are up in the air.
Yeah. So sometimes, storms roll through and one of the suburbs area, one of the smaller towns around the city will get just wrecked by a storm. And then the next town over is fine. At one point, it was in 2012, my car got destroyed by a hailstorm here in St. Louis. And Sam, who just lived, all across town.
Didn't even get any rain.
He was fine. He was fine, So there's a few areas kind of around us here that got 13 inches of rain in 6 hours, which was I think about the same amount of rain as the past 8 or 10 weeks.
It's been pretty
put together. Yeah. So just absolutely shattered the rainfall record for a single day by double, basically. And there were a few places where There were some creeks. There was like, I think it was St. Charles or St. Peter's, but there was a creek that's normally like a foot deep. The water levels went up by 21 feet. Just submerged everything. Lots of infrastructure damage. Lots of homes just absolutely flooded. Yep. We are okay. We have the high ground.
Yeah. That's always like the top thing on my list when I'm going to move somewhere is how high up am I compared to the water? Yeah. And we're still like, cause where I'm at, I'm like kind of on it's like a long ass
on a big
slope. It's a big slope, right? And so like the houses behind mine are like significant. They're easily 15 feet higher, like baseline than mine, or just like across the alley.
So you're going to get some runoff.
Going. So we get some runoff, but it then goes back kind of down, right? So like I'm not at the top of this thing, but there's also a lot more down to go for me, right? Before it's like really a problem.
What's funky is like when we were looking for a house to buy in St. Louis back in like 2016, maybe 2015, whenever we started.
Yeah, that's about right. Yep.
There was a condo that ended up being about 3 blocks down from where we had our house in U City. And I remember we were looking at it, we're like, oh, this is like really, really cute, really nice street, whatever. And Dad came to visit and I was like, hey, come look at this thing. And we're just driving. We're driving down the street to get there. And he just goes, this is in a floodplain. And I was like, what the fuck? I was like, no, it's not.
He's like, my Midwestern farm senses are tingling.
He's like, this whole place is going to be underwater.
Well, here's what's crazy. It was the River de Pere, which usually there's basically a huge canal right behind that street that sort of cuts across. And I'm pretty sure it's the River de Pere. And so but usually there's like literally 6 inches of water in that thing. It gets a really low key situation. Barely anything ever going on there.
But if that's where all the water goes.
Yeah, the street's called Dartmouth. That whole street flooded massively. You're talking like 5 feet of water pushing cars around and shit. That was basically 3 blocks from where our house used to be. So yeah, it's not good.
We also almost bought a house in a floodplain when we were buying it, and looked into it some more and noped out of there.
Yeah, just remember, 100-year floodplain now is
every year.
Yearly floodplain. So just keep that in mind.
Sometimes, I mean, it could, it's like in a single day, just all of a sudden, it's just, So, we're okay. But if it went up maybe another 20 feet,
who knows where that would go?
We'll be in trouble. So, and the crazy thing about it is how like, you say like how does like 13 inches of rain lead to like a 20-foot rise of water? And it's like, well, it's because like it's all 13 inches is just in one exact spot, right? So if you say like, 13 inches of rain hit, an entire square mile. Do you know how much fucking water that is? And then it all runs into one place, whatever the lowest place is, and it's a lot.
Yeah.
Which also makes you think, wow, clouds are really fucking heavy. Clouds
are they floating up there?
They're heavy,
clouds
but
way
not dense. That's their whole thing, basically. It's like,
did you have a cloud weighing like 100,000 tons or something? Just kind of boggles the mind.
Yeah, there's a lot of mass up there. Well, it's because, of course, the cloud doesn't even exist, right? It's just like what you see because there's fuckloads of water hanging around up there, right? Until eventually there's so much water and just so much water that all of it kind of starts to fall out, But it's not really like a cloud. You know what I mean? Just like
a cloud is just a sort of a moisture gradient. Yeah. It has peaked its ghostly limbs into the visual spectrum.
A cloud is like the self, it's an illusion of a unified entity. But in reality, it's just a whole bunch of stuff doing its best. Just kind of going wherever the wind takes it, and every once in a while explodes into a torrential down.
It just kills everyone. Fucking clouds.
Yeah, metaphor.
They're demons. Now, what we're going to do today is we're just going to do some questions. We're going to blaze through as many questions as we can. So we're upwards of potentially 2.
How are we doing on questions? Do we need to have a call to action?
Oh yeah. I mean, go ahead. Like, I mean, since we only get to like 1 or 2 on a given episode, we don't need that many in the pipe,
but they do expire.
Yeah, they do expire.
So if they don't get voted upon or answered, and as I said, they don't get answered very fast, then they eventually disappear.
They wither.
So yeah. So but pop in there, upvote some stuff, ask some questions.
Yeah, which you can do over at podcast.bscotch.net.
Yep.
So yeah, just, keep cramming questions into the question tube. And, maybe someday we'll get to it. So the highest upvoted question for today's episode comes from JohnFlavin, who says, what's your ideal breakfast? Is it different on a workday versus a weekend?
I will say that breakfast for me is my least favorite meal because I don't like having to eat in principle. It's just annoying that that's a thing I have to do. And it always results in chores. It's like, now I got to do some dishes, whatever. So with breakfast is when my brain doesn't work yet. I'm at my least capable of being a person in the morning. And then it's like, by the way, your human body needs some sustenance, So, which the end result is then that for me, the ideal breakfast is the one that comes in a package.
Sort of a nutrient pill.
Something that takes the least amount of time and makes the smallest mess possible, right?
Like that goo from the Matrix that they just slop into a bowl. But I mean, you don't want to do dishes, so maybe if you could just like put your head under the nozzle, slop some gruel into your mouth.
Yeah. So what I usually do then is have like cereal bars if we got them around. I'll just like shove one of those in my face, or toast with peanut butter on it. Get some of that fatty protein stuff going to get something in there, and offset blood sugar collapses. Or speaking of slop, I'll make some quick oats with peanut butter in it.
Do those
which is
turn to
basically
cement
just toast with
in
peanut
the bowl?
butter. You got to eat them instantly, but that's the benefit of it though, is that it gets cooked instantly. It's your quick oats, and then there's now a timer, so it's like you have to eat it fast, right? Which is what I prefer anyway. And I have to. So
You have to wash it too.
You got to wash it instantly. So it's actually kind of like the perfect collection of incentives for like
urgency.
the morning situation because everything is urgent. And if I don't do it, I know how shitty it's going to be later if I don't just.
Yeah, that's an ADHD breakfast right there. You're like, I'm going to pick a food that I have to eat right now. Yep. Otherwise shit's going to hit the fan. So you get a deadline,
but it's still easy to clean as long as you hit those deadlines, And so like it kind of hits the best of all of the categories. And you can put whatever the fuck in there you want. I just go with peanut butter, but like just the plain stuff, just peanuts, no sugar or anything. That way I can put the sugar of my choice in, which is obviously honey, because that's the best sugar in the universe. And so it's just like peanut butter, honey, just slop, right? Stir that shit up. So good. Perfect.
Down it, wash the bowl before it turns into a brick, and then you're good.
Then you're good.
I take a slightly different tack, which is it's not that I enjoy food quite a bit, but in the mornings in particular, similarly, I'm very loose mentally.
Yeah.
So typically what I do now is actually just have a cup of coffee and I put some coconut oil in it because then you get just a big chunk of fats to get your brains going. And so I just do that.
Does that just float to the top?
They do kind of float to the top. So don't make the mistake I did once of like my coffee was lukewarm after putting some milk in, and then I was like, "Oh, make some iced coffee." Threw some ice cubes in there. Went to drink it, suddenly sifting coconut
down
chunks.
fat chunks.
Yeah, because they turned solid just immediately.
Well, it's basically how you skim fat off of like a soup. Is you take a bunch of ice cubes and you like throw them in and then scoop them back up because all the fat sticks to them, like comes out of the solution and sticks to them.
Yeah, you could do that with coconut oil coffee. Also, would recommend though. Not good. So I typically do that, and then I usually on probably most days of the week, I fast until at least like 10. But usually I'll try to fast until about noon or so. And then my wife sometimes makes smoothies these days or kind of just random stuff. She'll just kind of come by and throw fruit at me usually. So I'll just eat like some grapes or something.
Yeah, it's the fruit version of quick oats, just like throw some stuff.
Yeah, fruit's great because you get plenty of sugars and stuff and you don't have to clean the dish, man. You just eat your apple through it.
Close your oyster.
Boom to boom.
Eat the stem. Do the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, I've eaten the same breakfast every day for, I guess,
all of time.
Probably like 13 years now, which is peanut butter on toast.
That's just a solid classic. Everything the body needs.
I mean, it has changed a bit over time in the sense that I've switched to the 15 grain bread, which is awesome.
Yeah, better toast.
Heavy.
Yeah, because it used to be, it used to be white, just like white bread, just like, which
was it the whitest of white breads? Was it Wonder Bread or was it something a little less?
No, it wasn't Wonder Bread, but I mean, it's all the same.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. So I don't know. It's a good, like, you get that slow burn protein and fat of the peanut butter. It's delicious. sometimes you get a nice surprise where like there's a hole in the bread, and then, you know, when you're eating it, then peanut butter just like gets all over everything. And then you try to touch something and you get peanut butter on it. Right. And it's like, oh yeah, like nice. This is like a nice little bit of sort of chaos in my morning. You know, you never know what's going to happen.
It's good to set yourself on edge early so that you're ready for whatever the day.
Yeah, you got to be jittery and kind of suspicious of your breakfast, because otherwise, like, what are you even doing? How do you wake up in the morning?
Have you seen the world?
Yeah, it's chaos out there.
Yeah, anything can happen.
Yeah, prep yourself with peanut butter holes.
Yeah, I mean, I always gave Sam shit because he somehow always managed to get peanut butter into everything. Yep. Like peanut butter or chocolate, like into his like phone charger hole. Yep. Just whatever. But you know, I'm the same. I just keep it on the. I just don't disclose that part of my life.
Yeah, you know, this is the risk of, you know, being an open person. You know,
when you open up, you get hurt.
Yeah, well, it's a reminder about selection bias and survivorship bias, right? Which is basically like if the only thing you only know about what you see. And so if you look at Sam and he's telling you stories about throwing peanut butter on the wall, right? You're like, man, Sam's
really going nuts with that peanut butter.
and then you just hear nothing from Seth at all about peanut butter or anything, or even eating. Then you're like, so Seth is a robot, I guess, who doesn't eat and doesn't make messes, right? When the reality is they're both throwing peanut butter on the wall, you know?
Yeah, and what you don't know is like on this video call right now, like I actually have peanut butter on the back of my head right now.
Well, that's actually what I was going to ask. If you guys are both doing peanut butter in the morning, because it has happened to me, as we've discussed multiple times and are alluding to, that I'll be like hours later working on something, and then I'll like wipe my brow or something, and then there's peanut butter on my forehead, and I'm like, how? There's like a piece of it that I somehow missed, like on the side of a finger, and then it's now on your face.
It's because it's so fatty that it doesn't dissolve easily. So it's just so easy to miss it when you're like, because like most stuff when you like wash your hands, if you like a quick wash, you know, if the water runs over it when there was stuff on there, sufficient, it's gone, right? But as soon as it's a really fatty thing like peanut butter or oil or whatever,
takes a bit more scrubbing and soap.
Yeah, it takes a little bit more effort. But because peanut butter doesn't feel oily. You know, because I think when there's still oil on you,
you can feel it.
If you miss it, you can still feel it, right? But peanut butter just kind of doesn't have that property. Like it's almost like just skin, you know? So
it's kind of like when you lay in those sensory deprivation tanks, you know, and they have to get the water like perfectly salty and the perfect temperature so that you can't feel it, right? Like peanut butter just naturally.
If they did that like with peanut butter, just like heat. Oh, the problem is because you can't keep moving it easily to keep the heat distributed properly, because that's a core part of the whole process.
Well, the thing is, you don't have to, because it already is just perfect. It's just perfect.
That's true. It's probably a perfect insulator, or perfect conductor, right? So you just heat it from the outside to the right temperature, right to 80 degrees or whatever.
You were talking about how like
sucking your heat away, and the heat from that creates a bath. That's perfect uniform temperature.
Yep.
You were talking about like rainwater always goes like the lowest place. I feel like with peanut butter, if you get peanut butter on you, it just ends up on your face at some point. You know what I mean? Like anything you got, any peanut butter you got on you, just at some point it's going to show up.
It's on your face. That's because it gets on your hands, and you always touch your face.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think you can think of it as revealing. So you know, there's that back to the survivorship bias thing, right? You know, there's that story of like these planes are going out in World War II, they're coming back with holes in them, and they talk to the statistician. They're like, oh hey,
the missing bullet holes.
Bullet holes. Right? They're like, look at all these holes in these planes. Like, we want to figure out like, based on kind of what we're seeing, like, can you come up with a way for us to figure out how to armor these things better, right? And so he comes back and he tells them where to put the armor, and it's all the places where they didn't see any bullet holes, and they're like, the fuck, this isn't where these planes were being shot, right? And he's like, the ones that came back had bullet holes in these places, right? And the ones that didn't come back must have been then the ones
must have been shot in the vulnerable places.
And so peanut butter those is sort of the detector. It's the missing peanut butter detector, right? So, but for hand washing. So, if what you do every single time, you're like, oh fuck, there's peanut butter in my hand. I wasn't expecting that, you know. Just look at where that spot is, and now you're like, okay, process with hand washing. That's revealing a spot that I'm not hitting with my hand washing routine.
It's actually sort of the inverse of the being shot thing, because of course you do actually see the peanut butter where it's problematic in this scenario.
Yeah.
But it is an important note though of the causal link, because like you're saying, peanut butter always ends up on your face, right? Except you've got to follow the chain and say it's because I always get peanut butter on my face because there's a gap in my hand washing technique, you know, and you got to follow the chain.
And there's a gap in your peanut buttering technique because you keep this is the shift left philosophy, right? You just keep moving upstream of the.
You've got to
workflow.
improve. You got to DevOps your toast.
Yeah. Figure out because like you can address the problem at any point in the chain, right? But the origin, like the exact origin, is a complex affair. You know, there's not a real source of like this is the problem, but you can address its consequences anywhere. But the consequences get cheaper the further left you move. So let's say you get a longer knife, so now your hand never hits the lip of that fucking jar, right? Now there's never peanut butter
smaller
on
jars.
your hands. Yeah, or smaller jars. That also works.
Yeah.
And then now it doesn't even matter how you wash your hands. You can just stop washing them.
Or wear gloves, you know, put on, like, act like you're in a catering business. Put on
Your
some
peanut butter gloves.
Boom, your peanut butter gloves.
I will say, I've been getting black latex gloves for cleaning, you know? So, like, if
What are
anybody,
you, a hitman?
if you ever watch, like, CSI, like, the cool CSIs, like CSI LA or whatever the fuck, right? Or, you know, where they'll always like they're just dressed in like casual clothes and they go out and they like snap on these dope black latex gloves or nitrile gloves, you know. And so one day I was getting pissed off. I was cleaning up cat vomit yet again, you know, and I was like, this is gross. I don't like being around this. Surely there's a solution. And then like that, I was just like, what? I live in the Amazon era, right? I can just go buy an infinite, and you can buy an infinite number of fucking rad nitrile black gloves, which is now what I do. And so if you do this, put this into your routine, come in the morning, snap on assassin gloves, right? Take out a fucking giant knife, right?
Yeah. And you assassin peanut butter jar.
You're ready to murder this peanut butter, right?
Oh, yeah, getting in there.
Stab it. And you're practicing your knife technique with this giant ass knife, like maybe a butterfly knife. You're flipping around, doing double tricks, right? And then stabbing it. And then you can get on that bread. Don't have to worry about anything because like get peanut butter blood on your hands. Doesn't matter. Throw your hands away, you know?
Peanut blooder.
Throw your hands away. The first time I saw those black gloves, I was immediately very annoyed for a very particular reason, which was that I remember some years prior going to help out with something. I don't remember fucking what, but I had to wear some gloves for it. And they gave you like those really weird, hideous plastic gloves that are like,
oh yeah, the
fat
prep
ones?
gloves.
Yeah, but their fingers are huge for some reason. I don't understand.
They're the one size fits nobody gloves.
Yes.
Yeah, like, technically anybody can get their hands in their gloves, right? It's like
Literally anybody.
Yeah.
Is your hand the size of a Buick? You can get your hand in there, no problem. Plenty of space. But
they
you
don't
can fit a whole
stretch.
family of
They don't
5
do
in there.
that,
Yeah, and so I remember I saw them. I think it was maybe at a barbecue joint in St. Louis, like what's it? Not Salt and Smoke, but the other one.
Yeah. If you're at a cool hipster restaurant, they're
going to be black gloves.
They're wearing these black nitrile gloves.
Yeah, and I saw them and I was like, "What? You're telling me that I could have looked that fucking cool?"
This was always an option, you know.
Yeah. What?
Yeah. Do you want to be a sandwich artist or do you want to be a barbecue connoisseur?
Yep.
You know, like 'cause that's the difference. Yeah,
I highly recommend
weird floppy plastic gloves.
I highly recommend get the nitrile ones. Like you can get a couple sizes. Like they're not that expensive. They cost the same as like the ones that don't look awesome. You know, so
This is the thing.
These are the Salt Bay, right? That dude Salt Bay. He wears these.
Yeah, Salt Bay. What even
this is this fucking dude. You got to look this guy.
It's the guy who sprinkles salt.
Yeah, he's just some guy who like makes dumb ass food, like mostly barbecue,
like intentionally dumbass food.
No, like
he's like acting as though he's like God's gift to barbecue. He wears these black circular sunglasses. He's got his hair kind of tied back. He always wears a white shirt with like an open like chest area, and then he has
these flamboyantly salting
gloves.
things. This sort of
shit. And then like his signature move is like whenever he presents the meat and it's always just like plain ass meat. Like he just like cooks meat.
Yeah.
He brings it out to the customer and he'll get out this like knife and he'll make this big show of like cutting pieces of the meat off. I was like, he's literally just cutting the meat. And then he busts out like a vat of salt and he like takes a big bunch of it in his hand. And then he does this like flourish where he like sprinkles the salt onto the meat and everybody loses their shit and pays him $12,000. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Dinner and a show, you know? He knows what he's doing. It's good.
It's like it's like Benihana.
What's the show? Yeah. Some dude cut your meat and put salt on it.
Yeah, the show. Well, no, the show is the theatrics.
It's like magicians. Yeah, it's like magicians where you're like, I don't care that you're like dancing around and throwing a cape. You know, like that doesn't change the act that's going on, right? But it can take what would otherwise be very boring, because some acts would otherwise be very boring.
Yeah.
And move it into like, at minimum, you're kind of confused, which is more interesting than being bored.
Definitely.
And I think that's kind of what this guy's bringing to the table.
I would say I was confused.
If you had to, I think if you had to give me the challenge, hey, I need you to salt this food in a way that 1 million people will lose their minds over, I don't think I would be able to figure that out.
No, I
don't know. It's just salt and food. I don't know what you want me to do about it. And he was just like, sprinkle, and everyone just freaked out. So I think, you know, there's some maybe a lesson.
Now, I mean, I do need to kind of ease back on my criticism of Salt Bae because, oh man, the marketing, like this dude figured out, hey, I can charge like $12,000 for a piece of meat.
yeah.
And people will just pay for it because I'm wearing gloves and I sprinkle it different.
Yeah, well, that's is once you're hitting that like that tier of cost, then which is not the same as that tier of value. People always say like, oh, this is worth X, right? And like, but the value worth means it's like there's an intrinsic link there, right? You should always just say it costs. That's better because
it costs.
That way, that's what you're not implying anything about the reason that it does, right? But this is one of those things. Like, if you're going to pay that much money, you're not doing it for the thing because there's no steak in the world that tastes so good compared to the next tier down. You know,
your taste buds have a limit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, at that point, you're spending the money because you're showing off that you can.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes just to yourself, that might be why you're doing it. You know, you're just.
Oh, yeah. Right. Nobody goes to this place without putting it on Instagram.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
That's
like
the purpose.
you go to Salt Bae or maybe TikTok. I don't know. Whatever. But this paying $12,000 for this event is something that it never happened unless it was filmed and put online.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
That's what you're paying for.
Yeah. So at that point, then everything there has to be stuff going on. You know, there has to be.
You got to make it ridiculous.
There has to be cool gloves that you know, like no dirty human hands have touched my rich person food. You know, like you got to make sure that there's a clear delineation. Yeah. And I will say, when it comes to like you get that chunky sea salt stuff, you know, you sprinkle a little bit on top of anything, instantly
better.
Instantly looks cooler. So like for a lot of why I don't like cooking is it's like finicky. They're always like, make it look really nice by putting things on top of things or next to each other. I'm like, no, put it all, just mix it up, cut it into small pieces ahead of time so I can just eat it. I don't want to have to cut it. I don't want to, just let me eat it, you know? But the problem with that is then you get to the territory of like, oh, we want to throw some parsley on top so you can like see the fucking green stuff, you know, like your accoutrement, right? Just throw that shit on there. But no, but it's like, why though? If I want to eat it, it needs to be mixed in, you know, like otherwise.
I mean, sometimes I do eat it and then I'm like, but because I can't tell. Sometimes the line.
You don't know. It's not prepped. It's prepped for you to look at, not for you to know how to eat, which is one of my hugest pet peeves when I go to a restaurant, especially like a nice one where they create this beautiful thing that is going to taste really good. But when I'm looking at it, I'm like, I do not know how I'm supposed to.
Which part of this is food?
Yeah. Does it all go together? Is it all food? Do I eat one? You know, so although good places will tell you exactly how to eat it, which is great.
Nice. Do they? So like they give you the food and then they also give you like a tutorial, like an
give you
instruction
instructions.
manual.
They say, listen, dummy, here's how you eat food. Yeah. It's very sweet.
But the thing about like the sea salt, right, is that now you can go to town pre-mixing. So now when I cook stuff, just fucking mix it all together, cut it in tiny pieces, right? And now it's always a bowl of like a mixture of something, right? Because that's what it's going to be anyway. So now it is that ahead of time, but I can still, if I want to, get that little flourish with a few chunks of sea salt, you know?
Oh yeah.
Bring that salt into your own life, you know?
Yeah, because a little dash of extra salt, just a small one, is always great in any context, even if the thing already has enough salt, you know? So you just don't have to mix that one in and you still get the flourish. Just pro tip for people.
Just a little pro tip.
Hate dealing with food the same way that I
put on your assassin gloves, put some salt on there.
Yeah, man.
Treat yourself.
Yep.
All right. Next question comes from FGKeiji, who says, "What is your approach to game balance and delivering a specific gaming experience versus allowing for emergent gameplay?"
We've been talking a lot about this.
We have.
How would you approach a situation where something unintended is loved by the community, but it goes against how you designed the game?
Yeah,
Our
This is
question's
very timely.
easier to answer, I think.
Very timely.
yeah,
Probably, right?
This is a tricky one.
I'll give a short answer to the latter question, then let Sam and Seth take over for the longer one. So that last part of the question, which is, what happens if the players start doing something or like really dive into a certain feature that we're like, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. Is we try to not do that because what we're making is an experience for people. We're not making our ego, So we're not making a thing. Like, it's not right because that's how we wanted it, right? We're not even designing it that way. We're trying to figure out, what do we think would be an awesome experience for the player? And so if it turns out we were wrong and something else is the awesome thing, then okay, that's the thing to figure out how to highlight, So that's cool. So everybody wins, actually, as long as there's something great in there. So that's the short.
Yeah, a little example of that is the idea of the one-tick switch from level head, which is in level head, we had, you can make your own levels that you can hook switches up to things. A good example would be you can have a turret that fires projectiles at the player. And somebody found a way to affect the switch system so that a switch can be toggled on and off every other frame. So 30 times per second, basically, which wasn't really part of our plan because every time you hit a switch that's hooked up to a turret, it shoots a projectile. So that means we were thinking the projectiles would shoot out, the turrets would shoot out projectiles, once per second, something like that, something manageable by the player where they can dodge the cannonballs or whatever. Now all of a sudden, these turrets become almost like laser beams where they're just shooting out. Yeah, they're firing out 30 shots a second, and they can create just like a total wall of death, right? Which is a very different kind of thing. And people found all kinds of other weird behaviors with these one-tick switches, like objects that toggle between being solid and non-solid. As the player's moving through them, then it creates this weird, like, amorphous physics environment where things don't behave the way that you would expect. And so, we saw that stuff and we thought, well, I mean, it looks cool. It's an interesting thing to do. Mm-hmm. I was laughing because I saw on the Levelhead subreddit, which, most people are in the Discord. So the subreddit is a little bit, has less activity, but I saw this little exchange where somebody posted something with these one-tick switches. And then the comment thread resolved in somebody going like, I hope the devs don't find out about this.
Sweet child.
I was like, we've known about this for years. We don't give a shit. Carry on,
I think when it comes to the question of greater game balance, I think the question is correctly framed, which is that the question of game balance is incomplete if you don't pair it with what you're trying to do with the balance. And what I mean by that is, I'm pretty sure the question is like what you're delivering some kind of experience, right? And how do you think about balance with regard to that? So it's very simple once you know what kind of experience you're trying to deliver. In the same way that I think, we're talking about like salt and food. It's like, if you know how salty you want your food to be, you can put some salt on it and taste it, put some salt on it and taste it until you find out how much salt you need, right? If you know what the experiences you're trying to deliver, similarly, you can, as long as you have access to a bunch of levers, then you can start basically tweaking things. So tweak, play, and figure it out. I think that the tricky bit is, one is doing a good enough job of setting up a combination of very broad general levers to pull on that affect everything in a particular category, a particular system. So in our case, we do some algorithmic driven balance for like recipes, component, like how much effort basically it takes to build a particular thing in the game. There's some really, really high level levers we can pull to just say like everything's more expensive or everything's less expensive. But then on an individual basis, you can also override that, right? So you can say this thing in particular is really expensive or this thing's much less. So having those levels of control, if you don't set those up ahead of time, then you end up in a position where the only way to affect the actual play experience is by basically doing some really intensive, refactoring or design work or whatever else, which is not always good. So I think one is basically the setup of those levers. But two, and I think this is more to the latter point of the question, which is when you have an idea in mind for a play experience you're trying to deliver, it is necessarily vague and incomplete. So maybe that is, if I'm talking about Crash Science 2, and if I say the words to you, we're trying to build a world that reacts to the player, and that the player has to learn how to read, how to navigate, as if they were a person in nature. Depending on who you are, where you're from, whatever, that will mean a bajillion different things to you, or frankly, nothing at all. If you've never really been in nature very much, you'd be like, I don't know, I saw a documentary once. Maybe there's lions attacking something. I don't know. So the challenge is in taking what is the vagueness of like a vision or emotional appeal that is sort of stated verbally, and then translating it, if possible, into a gameplay experience that delivers that. And then actually asking the question at the end of the day, now that you have that experience, that you maybe you're approximating it, you're close enough that it seems like maybe it's the correct thing. Is it actually what you thought it was when you were stating it with your vague words? And then is it what anybody actually wants or not?
Yeah.
And sometimes you're way off.
Yeah. So kind of an interesting example of how balance factors into this is whenever I think about balance myself as like a game programmer and designer, I just think about numbers tuning, which is basically that what you have is what you have, the mechanics, the interactions, the game systems, but you have a lot of sliders. You have a lot of different things you can change, which dramatically will affect the balance. So as an example, let's say we have these creatures in the world in Crashlands 2, and they have a certain amount of health. Mm-hmm. Right? That's just a number. That's just a number you can slide up and down. So if they have a low amount of health relative to how hard you hit with your weapons and stuff, then it feels as though you are sort of you're the strongest thing around, right? You could walk up and you just like whack a creature twice and it explodes into some crafting parts, right? Which makes the world feel generally non-threatening, and you're kind of free to navigate, and you kind of start to look at these creatures as like things that are just there for you to harvest.
Or disposable.
Right? Yeah. And so maybe in this scenario, we have done a lot of work to create lots of interesting behaviors in the creatures. Like they have interesting combat behaviors. They go out and they eat stuff in the world. They sniff things. They interact with each other. Are you going to notice that?
Mm-hmm. If they're dead in 2 seconds.
Yeah, whenever you see a creature, you're like, yeah, free real estate. You just get in there and just, smash it, right? And so it's this weird thing where by changing a single number, you can fully negate an entire suite of interesting concepts and mechanics that you painstakingly added to the game.
But it goes the other way too, right? Because if the place is just interesting to walk around in, right, then that also means that you've created this wider range of how the numbers can be tuned. Mm-hmm. Because the reason that like the balance question referring to like number tuning, right, is so important because it's like, how hard is it to do stuff? How long does it take to do stuff? Is like kind of what those focus on. It's like the numbers part, right?
Yeah.
And those are like reasonable questions because all those things should be reasonable, right? So that most players will feel good about whatever that range ends up being, right? But what makes them feel good about that range, right? What they're actually doing. It's not actually the numbers themselves, right? Because like I think V-Rising is a good example of this, where it takes a fuckload of resources to build your castle walls, right? So suppose your whole job is like build and then maintain a castle, right? But at the beginning of the game, like when you first then unlock the recipe, you're like, what the fuck? It's going to take so much stuff, right? But it turns out that because you don't actually need that many wall pieces, so like the net effect isn't as big. It's like once you start, you're like, oh, actually, this isn't too bad, right? Mm-hmm. But the main thing is that you're out doing stuff. And that kind of happens to get you what you need anyway. Sort of
incidentally getting the stuff.
So yeah, so all of a sudden you're like, you come back to your base like, oh shit, I can build a bunch of walls, right? Like you weren't even thinking about that really, because even though it's actually really costly in terms of time, like still a lot of stuff had to be harvested, right, to get there. Because you were doing stuff, you didn't actually think about it, which is so different from a grindy experience that you have where it's like, where if the only thing you're thinking about is getting that number bigger or getting like this weapon or whatever, and you're trying to make that happen, right? And you're like doing the things that have to happen. You just have to do that thing like over and over again or whatever. And that thing isn't fun, right? Or it's not interesting.
Well, it's not only that. It's because I think about this a little differently, because think of something like Cookie Clicker, okay, which is by definition a grind, a numbers grind game, right? But it's weirdly compelling because of the choices, right? Because in Cookie Clicker, you always have a a suite of things to choose from to put your cookies into to boost your rate of cookie acquisition, right? And the choice is always the same, which is, do I wait a little bit longer and get this next upgrade, or do I just spend my cookies now on a cheaper thing? This is literally the only, like, that's the choice you always have, but you have a choice, right? And things feel like a grind when you only have one path and one means to get there, because now all you're doing is just metering out the time. Like I need, like if you're saying, Adam, you know, in this game, I need to build a castle wall, right? Well, what if there was only one way to build that wall, one way to get the materials, and there was nothing else to do in the meantime, right? Then now you're on this track, and that's where you feel that grind.
You either need a choice in that choice in what the goal is, or a choice in how you're executing the goal, or ideally both. If you get in the
and it needs to always be interesting to you while you're doing it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think when you're looking at balance, and you really have to ask yourself, again, it always comes back to the question of like what the experience is that you're trying to deliver. And I think it's what the fun part is, which is like you can, it's the hard part actually, which is like you can expertly deliver on an experience that is not good. And what I mean by that is like you could have picked a particular feel that you're trying, like, oh, I want to make this like super frustrated, like sort of Dark Souls. You see this with like a lot of Souls-like game, right? The interpretation of what the like vision is for that game is something along the lines of like, it's just really hard and you have to get good and it's unfair and punishing. When in reality, it's not even remotely what if you wrote that vision statement down, like you're just going to get a bunch of really shitty, frustrated games out of it, right? That don't.
Yeah, and most games that are really hard, just nobody wants. Yeah. Nobody plays them. You know, it's not just about being hard.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of what we've been thinking about with with Crash Lands 2, and just I think in general these last couple of years, has been about how to choose points in the sort of arrangement of all these balance levers where you have room, you have space. And remember that is that the coupling between like the player having a good time and exactly what numbers you've chosen is lowered because of sort of the constellation of choices you've made. So instead of talking about earlier, we got these, if you have these creatures running around and that you kill them in like 2 seconds, something like that, you just don't have room for any other potentially interesting things to happen, right? Because that is such a short interaction that there's just really nothing else that could possibly intervene. There's not really a whole lot that you would even need to think about in terms of like approaching that creature or whatever else. Now, if you're making like an action arcade game, that might be exactly what you want, because you're not trying to make it be the case that people are, trying to figure out how to maneuver around this thing.
Same idea as cookie clicker, right? There's like a very specific thing that you're trying to accomplish.
So that's
which also can be super fun. It's just a very different experience.
Yeah, balance means something different because the player expectation and your expectation, what you're trying to deliver to the player, are just very different in these kinds of games.
So it's very, very tricky, but I think we've largely been pushing toward with Crash Lands 2 a combination of as much space as possible generated by the designs that we're choosing for these particular things, such that other parts of the game can actually exist and then can be engaged with by players in meaningful and interesting ways. And I think that's where you get emergence, which is to Seth's point about Levelhead earlier. It's essentially where the devs see an opportunity for players to do something surprising or for the game to behave in a way that maybe wasn't necessarily intentional. And the thing is, you can only get that in spaces where there's enough room, there's enough space resulting from the design decisions that things can kind of like take on a life of their own. Like everything's really, really tightly coupled. You can't really do anything with that. There's not a lot of emergence that can come out of it.
And I think a general warning is that if you find yourself getting really into the question of like, how do I make these numbers work together, right? Always take a step back during that process and ask, what am I trying to deliver here? What is like the player experience I'm going for? Because the numbers themselves like are a proxy because they're helping you deliver some aspect of it. Because you're not trying to deliver, this is difficult. Like nobody cares if it right. Difficulty can be an aspect of what it's like to have the experience, but you're not delivering difficulty. You're delivering the moment to moment thing that the player does, which may be difficult. Right. And I think to sort of briefly summarize the discussion we were having yesterday in the studio about Crash Lands 2 housing, right? And we're basically looking at the question is basically like, should your house be destructible? And if so, what the fuck does that mean, right? And we range this question like a lot. And But the place we started from originally was thinking of it as like a numbers balance resource problem, right? Where it's like, well, it's a crafting game. If your house gets destroyed, then that means do you get your resources back, right? And like, how much does it cost to fix it? And like, these are the kinds of questions we were asking, right? And we kind of juked sideways a bit, and we were like, but what does it mean? Like, what are we trying to deliver to the player, right? Because like, in this game, there's a certain vibe. We don't want you to feel crushed because everything you've spent all this time and investment in is gone. But it's also a lot more interesting if something can happen to it.
If you're not invulnerable just because you put down.
If you're not invulnerable, but even if it just feels that way, right? So like if the end result of something coming in and like fucking up your place, right, is that everything is still there, just broken, and you have to dump resources into it, like that's a pretty costly fix, right? And could be pretty horrible. Like it could be a horrible time that the person is. But if everything is broken and they just have to go like whack each piece with a hammer, just say like they just have to touch it basically to fix it, right? Now all of a sudden, like it's a little tedious. So there's still a cost, and there's like the emotional impact of like having their stuff get knocked apart, right? But they can fix it all in a few minutes or something, and it's not that big of a deal. And they can keep on adding layers to that to what the experience is of actually doing it. And all of a sudden, we're not talking about numbers here, right? Or there are some numbers, because now the number's like, how long does it take, right? But we took some numbers out, like how much resources is it going to cost, right? And so I don't know what we're going to do there, to be clear, but that's kind of the ranging of the discussion about balance needs to include the can we nots. And what if we took the different Englands entirely and just delivered in a different way than like tweaking a number?
Yeah. And this is why it's so tricky, because the reality is that the numbers are a piece of it, but you can deliver the experience you're trying to deliver sometimes by simply choosing to not do something at all, or changing how you think about a particular part of the game. Another example of this is that Crashlands 2 has docks. We had this problem in the original where people would put down floors. You basically build 4 floors, and now you can essentially cross any body of water anywhere, because you can just
because you can just build floors on top of water in Crashlands 1.
And so you put them down
any water. Yeah, you put them down, walk out there, pick up the ones behind you, put them in front of you, and just do that.
And the thing is, like,
cross.
That's not a fun experience, nor is it useful.
Just kind of tedious.
It's just tedious. It doesn't feel like an adventure. It doesn't feel like traversal. It feels very gamey. And so we have basically there's a dock system in Crashlands 2 for crossing bodies of water, and works great. And one of my biggest concerns with it was, okay, but once you put these things down, can we make it so that, picking them up doesn't quite work the way you think? Like it's not just like putting down a floor, picking it back up. It's actually, maybe they blow up when you pick them up because they're in water, whatever. And so you can't just sort of have this infinite docks thing as before. But what's interesting is that solution was trying to meet where the original game was coming from, being a procedurally generated game, where there's not really any particular retreading of the same space ever again. There's not really a value of leaving a dock present versus what's shown up in Crashlands 2.
Unless it's going to a fishing hole or something, since that will respawn there, right? That kind of thing. Yep.
Yeah. And so in Crashlands 2, though, there is a lot of value in retraversal because the world's hand built. And so you want to get over to a place, there's specific things in a place. And so what we found so far is actually people don't pick up docks, which means there's no thing to even worry about.
Yeah, it's more about a thing about, it's like, okay, I've built a bridge now.
Yeah, it feels like a bridge.
And that bridge is just there because I will be coming back to this place multiple times. And so the idea of like having to lay down the tiles for this bridge every time I come here just sounds annoying as hell, and I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to build the docks, make it into a bridge, and I'm done.
Yeah.
Now,
so when you look at the balance of that, it's like, okay, well, you're trying to solve this particular problem, which is to make this feel like an adventure, right? Vision wise, someone just picking up the dock they put behind them, put it down in front of them, not exactly adventurous, very tedious and annoying. But that turns out to really be a thing that relates to how the world is constructed. It's not about, you could impose a cost on it if you want to. You could use some numbers to try to solve it, make the docks cost less, so people maybe don't care too much about throwing them down, make them blow up when you pick them up, all sorts of things. But it turns out that the balance of that thing is affected actually by the shape, the topology of a whole other system in the game that you can't wiggle a number on, right?
Yeah, because the first thing is actually what traversal across bodies of water looks like and how often you need to do it, right? Because that's what answers the question. What do we want because then the question still is first is, what do we want the experience of traversing the world to be like? And then how does crossing bodies of water fit into that? How much effort do we want that to take, given how we've distributed like the communities and resources and quests and like whatever around the world? If we want it to just be easy to cross water, so it's just like a minor inconvenience because we want you to really just like get out there and like world is your oyster kind of a vibe, right? Then that's one approach. If you want it to be just expensive, then that also incentivizes making fewer things, right? So then if it's expensive, a user's going to want to pick it up and move it, right? But if every location is really useful to have kept there, then even if it's expensive, they'll still invest in it and leave it there. And they might pick it up a few times first, right? Because they're trying to get to a place and they just want to get there. But then over time, if they're going to be retraversing, as Sam said, like going back and forth to the same places repeatedly, they're going to want that to be easy. And so now all of a sudden, the value of that bridge to the player is super high, right? And so if they have to invest a lot into it, it feels like it makes sense, right? So,
but you also can take this as an opportunity to as you play through the game and are trying to tap into like, how am I feeling as I'm playing it? What are my desires, right? And try to build additional layers of game systems to meet those needs. So in the case of docks, one of the things we have is the idea of like being able to improve your crafting recipes so that at the very beginning I got the recipe to make docks and I'm like, oh yeah, and I start building some docks and I'm like laying them across the water to kind of close some, create some new paths for myself. And yeah, the docks are kind of expensive. So then over time I come across some additional things that I can do to make it cheaper and more efficient to build docks, right? And so I'm looking at that. And now much like, when we think about in the case of the cookie clicker, how just having choices of where to put your resources suddenly becomes like an interesting logic puzzle, right? So in this case, it's like, all right, I can spend resources on just making more docks, period. Or I can sacrifice some docks in the short term and some of those materials to improve forever my ability to create more docks. And I think I'm going to want lots of docks. So I'm going to go ahead and take the hit in the short term, do this research, upgrade this thing. And now boom, like my desire to have docks be cheaper has been answered by the game. Right. And so when it comes to these questions of balance, you don't necessarily have to have a firm, like this is the experience, like docks are expensive or whatever. You can say, here's a starting experience, but then we're also going to open up some paths so that if the player wants to change their experience a little bit, to match what they're interested in, then the game has answers to that as well.
I think
and so you just keep opening up these threads and paths.
I think it's generally it's frankly, I think a better approach to use that emotional center for the design experience. Because the weird, to Seth's point, like the weird thing is that like you can get the same emotional experience from doing a bajillion different things on like balance, right? From changing how the whole system works, changing even like tweaking some of these levers, adding something new in, changing the framing, even just letting people know something exists sometimes is all you need to do. There's so many ways to do it. And so I think it's really easy. And one of the things you see, I think people do who aren't as fluent in design is just really getting fixated on a lot of the, like a particular detail of a thing without, like Adam was saying earlier, like you got to frequently step back and be like, what are we trying to do? And I mean that not in you cannot speak that in a super concrete way. It has to be on that kind of emotional appeal and experiential feel way. It can't just be like, well, I want things to, cost more. It's like, why? What are we doing?
Well, I would flip this around and focus less on the question of what do I want to do as the developer, and think about it more as like when you're playing the game, ask yourself, what do I want to do as the player? Like, how am I feeling? What kinds of things, if I'm playing this game, and I think to myself, man, I wish I could do X, right? Why do I feel like that? Why do I feel like I want to do that thing? And does the game have an answer to that desire? I would
compare it though. So the thing is, you can't just go from the
it's not one directional.
Yeah,
but
well, you're right. It's like
you got to be in tune with both sides. Of
you're saying like, here's the intended experience that I'm trying to deliver on the design side, and then when I'm playing it, what is the actual experience I'm getting, and where's like this weird, where's stuff on the mark or off the mark? Yeah, and then basically it's the conversation between those 2 points that you can find to bridge.
And I think the important thing is to not be married to the intent. And tune in a lot to what the actual experience is and ask yourself, like, is this good? Is this interesting? So like with the destructible buildings thing, that's something that I've just kind of uniformly been like, I don't want that. I don't
It
want.
sounds
I don't
bad,
want.
right? Like it
Yeah,
sounds like
having played Eve Online and had a bunch of Germans come and destroy my fucking space station while I was sleeping, which literally happened because they're on a different time zone and they can come in while I'm sleeping. And
it's
blow
like
up all
the
my shit.
ARC multiplayer servers, which like I would never in a million years join because like if you leave the server, your body stays there. It's always online, and then the game is PvP, so someone's just gonna come murder your body and take your shit. You know, it's like it's not. I guess clearly a lot of people love it, but
I think again, this
not
is
for
what I
me.
think is so fascinating about it. Because like to go to the top of the discussion and to reinforce what you're saying, it's like what you're saying is I don't want my building destroyed. But again, that statement is so vague. Actually, it's so vague. Actually, in terms of what that would mean. And
And
this
what you're actually saying is you don't want the emotional response that you're imagining
Would happen.
given what you're imagining building destroying to look like.
Yeah, I'm saying I don't want to invest a bunch of time and lose everything.
Yeah. Yep.
Right, which is a different
statement.
That's a different thing to say than like I don't want something to come in and wreck my base.
Because it could be
Right.
very interesting
Because
and fun to have your base blown up, provided certain other things were true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's interesting and doesn't cause like a lot of negative effects, right?
Yeah. If it doesn't suck,
And importantly, the only reason we had that conversation was because of an accident.
yeah.
Yes.
Right. Because everything in your base has been indestructible up to this point, and we missed a spot. We missed an indestructible toggle on a certain important base item, and a creature got into my house and destroyed it just by accident. It was trying to kill me, but just collateral damage. It blew up this other thing. It
was very fun.
And fortunately, even though that was an important progression item, there happened to be another one somewhere else on the map that I knew about. And so I had a backup so I could go like otherwise without that, I would have been completely trapped and I would have had no recourse. And my immediate reaction to that was like, shit, that's crazy. Like this thing got into my house and blew up my workstation. Right?
It was a good story. It was an
And
interesting experience.
it's remarkable.
Yep.
Right. Which means like it's something that you can talk about. And that kind of like made me have to rethink my position on this idea of like nothing in your base should be destructible, because if that was true, then it would not have mattered if this creature got into my house.
Yep.
It just wouldn't have
It
mattered.
would just be in your house now, I guess.
Which means, does my house matter? Like, does it matter that I'm building all these walls? Does and we do have other game systems to make it matter, but are they remarkable? Mm-hmm. And they're not nearly as remarkable as
a bull coming in your house,
that, right? Yeah, and so sometimes you do have to measure what you thought your intent was against what might actually be a really interesting experience, and even if those things are completely at odds, you got to reevaluate sometimes.
Well, it's about avoiding the gut reaction of starting with exactly what you imagine and being like, no, I hate that, right? Because that is what we all do. We're all like, we think we know just what that means immediately, but there's so many ways to deliver any given kind of like practical, so like the practical experience of a creature doing something, interacting with your base, because that's actually what's interesting, right? Like the fact that they can't at all, because we're just thinking about it in terms of damaging, right? We're like, oh, that'd be bad if you lose everything. So it's like, then no, we'll just take that interaction away, right? But there's so many ways that a creature could interact, even ways that are just about destruction, right? And then outcomes that can happen. But if you're always thinking about everything in the same way, where basically like resources get destroyed and turned into loot, and like buildings get constructed, and if they get deconstructed, they give you your loot back. And so, and if you're thinking of like the building process of like putting up and taking down as the same as like the destruction process,
I think you basically got to be careful that you're not using the negative emotional basically effect that you've experienced in a system like that in previous games as the only way of thinking about how that system could be delivered. And I think we usually see as far as like games that suddenly stand out in a way where you're like, wow, that was there the whole time. Technically, like that was an available option the whole time, but for some reason no one did it. I mean, I think you see that
nobody did it.
Yeah, you see it like Breath of the Wild. Like everyone lost their marbles, and like why? It's like, well, technically, you could design an open world game where it's more about reading the world as opposed to following quest markers. Like there's a way of solving.
This was always
an option. It's just like, and you could say something like, well, I don't want to have this like open world experience, but there's these problems of player direction, or we have all this content. We want people to see it. How do we get people to see it without a quest marker? And it's like, there's a billion fucking ways to solve this problem. So be careful preemptively cut.
And if there's a lot of stuff to see, right, and there's a lot of stuff to do, then even if they don't see all of it, if they're having a good time, then they will do everything they can to find out how to see the rest of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you have to let go sometimes. Just be like, okay, I'm going to put all this stuff in the world, and like maybe the player's only going to see 5% of it because that player chose that path. So what?
Spoiler alert.
That's
Most
okay.
people who buy your game are not going to finish it.
Yeah, no matter what game it is.
So no one's going to see any of your shit, like sort of statistically. Yep. So you can get over it.
Yeah.
Get over yourself.
And even of all the people who did buy the game, that's like less than a fraction of a percent of the world's population. So essentially your game doesn't even exist. So you might as well just do whatever you want. Know what I mean?
Yeah.
Know what I mean? That's a great place to end it, I think. So we'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampada Coster for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Goodbye. Bye.